You need to see this exchange between Kristen Welker and Trump's UN ambassador Mike Waltz today, because I promise you, you will not get a more self-contradicting 60 seconds of television than this.
You raise assets. I want to ask you about the assets. NBC News is reporting the Pentagon is actually rationing some defense weaponry amid diminishing supplies. Is America backing away from a larger military attack because its military stockpile has been depleted?
Well, look, we have to take a step back here in that a lot of stockpiles were depleted, not only from what we gave Ukraine over the last however many years, 4 or 5 years, and the administration inherited, the Secretary Hegseth inherited a depleted situation from not only Ukraine, but also the ongoing fight with the Houthis under the Biden administration and a depleted military under the Biden administration. So they have decided, one, they're going to new types of munitions, cheaper munitions, new technologies, but also with these new defense budgets, rebuilding our great military. However,
but you acknowledge
I want to be clear.
Do you acknowledge they're depleted at this moment?
I want to be crystal clear. The U.S. military, and I've verified this every which way, has everything that it needs to conduct this campaign as effectively as it needs to be. And I have to tell you, the people that are leaking this nonsense deserve to be in jail.
Oh, nothing. Just Mike Waltz both blaming Biden for a depleted stockpile, which in the very next breath he claims doesn't exist, and that anybody who suggests otherwise should be jailed. Sorry, what? But let's actually engage with his own excuse for a second, because even on the merits, even on its own terms, it falls apart. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that Joe Biden really did leave the stockpile in bad shape. Okay, Trump has now been president for nearly 2 years, with full control of government, and with that time, he has requested the largest Pentagon budget in American history, $1.5 trillion for next fiscal year alone, a nearly 44% jump on top of what he already called a record $1 trillion this year. This isn't a White House that's been starved for defense funding. This is a White House that has gotten more money for the military than any administration in the history of this country. So if our stockpile is depleted, maybe ask the president and the Fox weekend anchor turned Secretary of Defense where all of the money is actually going. Like, you don't get to ask for $1.5 trillion, brag about record spending, and then tell us that the stockpile shortage is still somehow Joe Biden's fault a year and a half later. At some point, this becomes yours. You had the budget, you had the time, you had total control of the Pentagon, total control of the entire legislative branch, total control of the government. If the stockpile is still thin, that's not a hangover from the last guy. It is a management failure that happened on your watch with your money under your Secretary of Defense. In fact, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that Mike Waltz tries to blame Joe Biden, considering this guy even blames Signalgate, wherein he discussed war plans in a Signal thread that he started, where he invited a reporter on Joe Biden as well.
One of the things that I was briefed on very early, Senator, was by the CIA records management folks about the use of Signal as a permissible work use. It is. That is a practice that preceded the current administration to the Biden administration.
Director Ratcliffe, I've got a series of questions. If you're making the statement, making the statement, the Signal is a secure channel.
No, can I answer that? It is.
I've got a series
of decryption. So
to finish, I understand encryption.
It is permissible to use to communicate and coordinate for work purposes, provided, Senator, that any decisions that are made are also recorded through formal channels. Right. So those were procedures that were implemented. My staff implemented those processes, followed those processes, complied with those processes, and finally, just please. So
I'll tell you what. I really hope that Joe Biden has some good liability insurance, because if Mike Waltz ever trips going up the stairs, I have a feeling I know who's going to be at fault here. But it's not just Mike Waltz. It is the entire administration having learned from Donald Trump that you can always blame the last guy. Here's the Secretary of Agriculture just a few weeks back on News Nation getting pushback for attempting the exact same diffusion of responsibility.
Diesel prices now at $5.20 per gallon. It's about $1.50 than before the war started. What do you tell the ag community right now who's dealing with that?
Well, there's no doubt that our farm economy is in a challenging time, right? Inputs under the last administration up by about 40%, even with those diesel prices that you just mentioned. And I'm not underplaying that that's not important, but that's still less than it was during the Biden years. Now, we got it down way lower before Iran happened. But we're still battling to bring those input prices down, not just gas, diesel, fertilizer, seed, labor, et cetera. And those are all coming down, also opening up the markets. But we're going to get there. And the president's leadership on this is paramount. The next year, our exports are going to hit record numbers. Our inputs are going to keep decreasing. And we're going to get out of this in a big way.
I hear you on the Biden administration, but your administration's been in office for 18 months now, and obviously this is a war under this current president. The blueprint that was just passed calls for $12 billion in farm aid. It's normally a conservative principle of government shouldn't be picking winners and losers, right? And obviously the farmers are getting help while other industries are not. How do you square that?
Well, I think that what we are looking at, and I've really spent a lot of the last 18 months talking about farm security, is national security. The rural America, obviously a very important part of keeping America free and the ideas of our founding fathers. But it's much more than that. It really is national security.
See how convenient? Always Biden's fault. They want all this power, but are still falling over themselves to be these helpless little victims in the fetal position, powerless to affect any change. And that right there is the real story. Bigger than just munitions or fertilizer, it is that nothing is ever their fault. Ever. Inflation, Biden's fault, even a year and a half in. The stock market, Biden's fault. A depleted weapons stockpile in the middle of a war that they chose to escalate, also somehow Biden's fault. This is a White House that has fully inverted the oldest rule in the book of the presidency, that the buck stops with the president, the guy in charge. In this White House, the buck never stops anywhere. It just keeps getting punted backwards forever to an administration that left office a year and a half ago and counting. And when that excuse gets too thin to hold up, like it did today in real time on live television, notice how the fallback is never honesty, it's never taking responsibility for what they've done, it's always just threats. Walz's answer to being caught in his own contradiction was simply, these people leaking this deserve to be in jail. In other words, when the excuses run out, they don't take responsibility, they just go after the people who are telling the truth, who deign to tell the truth. First, it's Biden's fault, then it's not even happening, and then if you keep asking questions, maybe you belong in a cell. That's not accountability, it is the opposite of accountability. It's an administration that has spent a year and a half building an entire governing philosophy around never once saying the words, that happened on our watch, no matter how much money, how much time, or how much power they've had to fix it. And today, in front of a nationally televised audience, we got to watch that philosophy short circuit in real time, because you cannot blame a guy for a problem that you are simultaneously insisting doesn't exist. So pick one, Mike, because you don't get both.